Welcome to another episode. Mikey on mute, your mind's implode. He's coming off mute for you. Feel the vibe, it's something new.
Hey everybody, and welcome to another episode of Mikey on Mute. I'm Mikey, your host, coming off mute, not only to share my mental health journey, but talk to others about theirs, gain some perspective on their lives, and really keep that conversation going. Today, I am thrilled to have my guest. Here is a person who is a guiding teacher and the co-director of Wild Heart Meditation Center in Nashville, Tennessee. Ladies and gentlemen, Mikey Livid is a Buddhist teacher who has been empowered to teach both. I'm going to try to say both of these. So, Theravada, hopefully that was pretty close, and Mahayana. That's
Mahayana.
Way off. Mahayana. There we go. Traditions. Thanks. I appreciate that. Mikey also holds a master's degree in counseling psychology. He integrates these two worlds, that old school Buddhist teachings with new school psychology, and uses it in a way to help individuals really free themselves from all kinds of suffering. So, ladies and gentlemen, listeners of the podcast, please welcome Mikey Livid.
Yay! Thank you. Peace and love. I'm fan-fucking-tastic. Yeah, peace and love.
Excellent.
Peace and love. This is quite a delight to be on a podcast with another Mikey, and
Yeah.
I listened to your podcast too, and it's quite a pivotal thing that you're doing, right? Like there's so much, the world's just a mess of a place, and this is what I truly believe in makes the world a better place. When we actually go inside and look in and find peace with these conflicting things inside of us, it really has an effect on the world. So thank you for having an effect on the world in this way, where it just naturally has this like ripple effect, in probably in so many ways you have no idea. So thank you so much for having me. Thank you so much for doing the work you're doing. I appreciate you completely.
Well, I really appreciate the kind words. It's so nice to hear whenever I have somebody come and be like, you're making an impact, whether that's on just me listening or somebody else. It really brings it all full circle from sharing my story, and my story is constantly going. I mean, I'm in therapy every week, and there's going to be updates and all that stuff, but I wanted to just kind of be, hey, if I'm going through all this stuff, I can't be the only one, and hopefully if I talk about it, we can have some more conversations. Like you said, the more conversations we have, kind of the better we can have this better impact on the world, if you will. And so I appreciate your kind words. I really do. I was super excited to have you on because, well, multiple reasons. Number one, you've been such a big supporter. We connected organically through Instagram. It was one of those, follow of a follow, and you find somebody, and you've always been a huge supporter and really nice to talk to. So I'm glad we get to do this face to face now. The other reason I was excited is because I wanted to get different perspectives on this podcast, ones that I either can't understand because of just life or situations I'm not in. And this becomes one of them because I get to talk to somebody. I know very little other than what mainstream media has taught me about Buddhism. And so I'm very excited to be able to talk to somebody that is there day in and day out to give us a little bit more of an insight on what it actually means. So I guess the first question I had is the differences between the two words that I kind of struggled here. So that you have Theravada, is that correct?
Yeah.
Okay. And then, yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
So the words, I'll mercifully interject here.
I appreciate it, because I swear before this call I said them like 4 times each. I'm like, I've got this, and then we started recording, and I'm like, I lost it. It's gone.
It's quite all right. Sometimes, it's just like any other spiritual faith. There's the different sects and the different divisions and the different schools, and Yeah, I kind of like that. I'm like, I could do whatever, all of them. We find ourselves in a cultural moment where there's so much offered when it comes to spiritual traditions. So, if we're talking about the main divisions of Buddhism, it's MTV, Mahayana, Theravada, and Vajrayana. And I typically speak to the Theravada tradition. That's what we follow at Wild Heart Meditation Center. And typically what they say the division is where Theravada's for the psychologist, and Mahayana's for the poet, and Vajrayana's for the artist. So Theravada is just like the bare bones, old school Buddhism, what the Buddha taught, and it's extremely pragmatic. It's extremely psychological. It's very mappy. You'll get all the lists, the Four Noble Truths, the Eightfold Path, the Four Foundations of Mindfulness, the Four Brahma Viharas. It's like they like call us the list worshippers, right? And where Mahayana, where it's like things like Zen, where it's like the koan studies, form is emptiness, emptiness is form, where they kind of like mind fuck you into like discovering the nature of reality. And then Vajrayana is typically like Tibetan Buddhism, a lot of imagery and stuff like that, a lot of meditating on different deities and stuff like that. So I typically these days practice in the Theravada, just the old school like psychology Buddhism. Yeah.
Sure. That's also, I also love that the acronym you used here to describe is MTV. Anybody that's watching the YouTube video, I mean, Mikey Livid is the definition of what you would think to see on MTV. Maybe at least back when I watched MTV, but that's been quite quite some time since. But I love your look, man. It's the dyed hair and the patches on the jacket. That's awesome. I know you have some band background, but is MTV, that acronym, is that something that other people teach that way, or is that something that you had kind of come up with to get those three?
Yeah, I don't know who came up with it. I definitely didn't come up with it, but it's
I
definitely
was trying to credit
something
you.
around.
Trying to credit you.
Sure, I'll take it. Right? Yeah.
Well, that's awesome. You spoke and mentioned that's what you do at Wild Heart Meditation Center, and so I really want to know what was like a driving force for you to start it. What is your involvement today? Just give us some brief understanding about Wild Heart. I'd love to hear more from it.
So, another way of not taking credit, I did not start Wild Heart Meditation Center. Our community started with one of my teachers. His name's Dave Smith. He lives in Colorado currently. And he moved away, and then another buddy of mine, Andrew Chapman, took it over, and then he now has passed it down to me. How I got involved was I am a person in long-term recovery, and predominantly my recovery is a Buddhist path to recovery. And there was a point where I needed to leave town. My wife's work was like, oh, we're shutting down where you have your work in Florida. Where would you like to go? Here's the options. And it was either New Orleans, like Myrtle Beach, Atlanta, and Nashville was an option. And I knew Nashville had a great Buddhist recovery community. And then I was like, let's just move there. And, I don't know if anybody's like moved to a new city before, like, nobody. It sucks. It was awful. Like, I was very much like depressed at that time. And the only thing that made me feel somewhat okay was going to a community of people that got me. Community of people that were in recovery, were facing their own, inner turmoil. People that loved things that I love, like meditation and, radical subcultures too, and all of that. But ultimately, the only thing that made me feel okay, and still to this point, like Nashville is awesome, but it's still not my city. And the thing that keeps me here is Wild Heart Meditation Center. And yeah, it's my home. When I leave the house, that's where I go. I love it there. Yeah.
Well, that's awesome. And I was, we were talking slightly a little bit offline. This is the first time I think I've interviewed somebody in the same time zone as me, which is great. So it's been a trick to do that. But I haven't really been to Nashville, at least not since I was very young, like probably maybe like 10 years old. And that was more so like, did the Dolly Parton, Dollywood stuff and all that. I don't know if that's
Hell yeah.
Nashville specifically, but which definitely would want to go back because my wife loves Dolly Parton. Like we threw her a Dolly Parton themed birthday party the other year. It was great. Uh,
Yeah. Yeah.
I Tennessee in general is definitely on my list to get out and travel to this year. I want to do more traveling, so hopefully we'll see about when I can get. But I'm excited to get out there, and so I love hearing you talk it off. But I know it's got to be tough, like you said, moving to that new city, got nobody around, probably very isolating feeling. So were there things, was it just the workings and teachings with Buddhism, or were there anything else that kind of helped you get past that or feel more comfortable in Nashville?
Um, yeah, I don't know if it's an interesting thing, just even the path of the Dharma, the teachings of the Buddha, where, yeah, like comfortable. Right, which Nashville's cool and all of that, and it, like, I meet celebrities all the time. There's celebrities everywhere, and it's like exciting and all of that. But like I said, it's not my place. But it's okay. That's okay. And I think that's where this lesson arises, that it's okay if I'm not comfortable. That in this Buddhist path, what we're doing is finding peace with our discomfort. And it's like, yeah, not stifling or ignoring, but really, okay, if this is where my calling is to be, at a place that I may be a little uncomfortable in, okay, I can find peace in that discomfort. And yeah, that's kind of the practice.
It's really tough living in that discomfort, whether it's moving to a new city or even just like I've talked a lot with my therapist, doing the things that are really hard for me, because I think with a lot of how we live is we find things that might like trigger us or cause things to rise in us, and we just avoid them where we can. We kind of, put it off to the side. So the way we grow as humans is being uncomfortable. Like it's weird to say, but the more uncomfortable you are, the more you have to face a lot of things internally. And it's scary, whether it's, a thing with Buddhism teaching or therapy. Like I do a lot of CBT therapy with my therapist, so it's a lot of that. I've also done ACT with the, more accountability portion and all that. So it just, it's weird to tell people like you need to be uncomfortable. It's a weird conversation to have, but I have found so many answers in my life in the most uncomfortable situations. My anxiety was spiked high while it was happening. I wish I could say I was a superhero and I put it to the side and everything was good, but that's not the case. So I always really enjoy when somebody else brings up, living in the uncomfortable, facing that. That always makes me happy. And it kind of brings me to a next question here. Within your practice, how does mental health and your experience with mental health, how does that play into your, daily things? Is it something you work with others on, or give us kind of an overview of how mental health ties in with that?
Yeah, just in general, or something like
Yeah,
like a
just
specific.
in general.
Yeah.
Whatever you want to talk about on there. I'm trying to think, like we have talked so easily about being uncomfortable, but are there is there anything that within, Wild Heart, is there mental health specific, classes or training or anything like that, or is it more so just how you live your life and like speaking to others?
Yeah, it's a interesting phenomena we find ourselves in, that historically, Buddhism, as it moves throughout the world, it has an interesting way of adapting to the cultures it finds itself in. And so, yeah, where Buddhism started in northern India, and then it just started to spread, and it would go over to like Japan, and they would have like the non-dualism of like Taoism, and then where Buddhism met Taoism, now we have Zen Buddhism, like a non-dualistic Buddhism. And then it goes over to China and meets like the folk religions of like Tibet, like Bon. And now we have Vajrayana Buddhism, where it has like these imageries, like I was saying before. And so as Buddhism starts to come over to the West, specifically the United States too, it isn't necessarily integrating with our religions. It's not necessarily integrating with Christianity or Judaism or Islam. It's integrating with mental health. And what we're going to have, I predict, what we're going to have in 100 years from now, they're going to be like, oh yeah, that's those mental health Buddhists, because it adapts very well with mental health. And so things that have already fully permeated our culture that are rooted in Buddhism, like mindfulness. It was 2014, the mindful revolution began, and a lot of that was because of the work of Jon Kabat-Zinn, what he did decades before. Jon Kabat-Zinn started mindfulness-based stress reduction and used his own Buddhist practice to help people with chronic pain. And so he started the stress reduction program based off of core old school Buddhist teachings. If you look at mindfulness-based stress reduction, it's the 4 foundations of mindfulness. In Buddhism, we call that satipatthana. Satipatthana is a Pali Sanskrit term, and you look at what the Buddha supposedly said on these 4 foundations of mindfulness, and you look what Jon Kabat-Zinn said on it. Yeah, it's mental health, right? And that's what the beauty is. In even I've heard the modern wave of therapy, what defines the modern wave of therapy is mindfulness. And so you think about certain aspects of therapy. I work with a lot of like parts work, like internal family systems therapy. And some of the language there is extremely in line with Buddhist thought. The idea in internal family systems is that we are a collection of parts. Not necessarily one identity. So you name like, oh, that's my angry part, or that's my resentful part, or that's my scared part. And we have these different parts that have different jobs. And if you look at Buddhism, it's saying the same exact thing. We're not one singular identity. We're a collection of what they said, aggregates or parts. And the Buddha taught to not cling to these parts as I or mine. You know, that when that hateful part of you arises, don't fight it, but don't also cling on to it either. Just observe it. And that's like really huge in mental health, that mindfulness, we can use the mind to view the mind. So many times mindfulness is misinterpreted as you don't have any thoughts. And that's not what this is about. It's about knowing a thought is a thought. That's a thought. The quote I will continually give over and over again is from a Burmese teacher in my tradition, Munindra. He says, a thought of your mother is not your mother. It's a thought. And when you start to observe the thought, you start to bring peace with these thoughts. That we develop a self-love that is deep. You know, like we in our modern culture, self-love seems to be something that's valued, but I think we should take it further, like a radical self-love, a love that can look at our self-hatred completely and see that self-hatred and say, I can love you to self-hatred. And then we make peace with those conflicts. And this is what the Dharma, the teachings of the Buddha, shows us, and this is what therapy shows us. They both do these very wonderful things, and I don't like separating them too much. I like honoring the traditions. That's why I call myself a Buddhist teacher, because this is the long lineage that I'm held by, right? I'm just a drop in a big stream of history here, and I am very grateful for that. I didn't come up with anything I teach, and at the same time, the situations and the people I get to serve is so fucking heartwarming that I go into prisons and it's just like bearing witness to the Dharma, the teachings of the Buddha, the lessons, the truth of existence, just come alive in somebody that has done something so terrible that society has deemed them inappropriate to live within our culture, that they've been cast aside and banished from society. And then watching this truth come alive in them as they meditate and bear witness to the chain of events that led them to someplace like a prison, and watching them forgive themselves and forgive society for banishing them. And that's just one example. Like I go into treatment centers, a treatment center all weekend, teaching mindfulness, loving kindness meditation, these old school practices that sit very well with modern therapy. So, yeah, I can go on and on, but
No, I love
that's what
that.
I sit.
Love the
Yeah.
integration here with
Mm-hmm.
Buddhism and mental health and mindfulness is a big thing that speaks to me. I understand that when I first did hear mindfulness and I was hearing about like you should meditate and all this, and it seemed very much like you would see on the media, and I'm like, I don't think that's going to work for me. And understanding it's more about breaking through and being understanding of in the moment. And mindfulness has taught me so much about, I have lived most of my life either worrying about what happened in the past or worrying about what's going on in the future. And that was a big light bulb moment for me when I said, oh my gosh, I'm not living in the moment. How have I made it this far? It's almost like you hear about that moment where you're driving and next thing you know you're home and you're like, I don't even remember driving the last 5 minutes. Hopefully don't do that, everybody out there. I'm just trying to use an example, but that's how I felt like I lived most of my life, just on this cruise control. And I was so worried about what was going to happen and using evidence from my past that I was not giving my presence to what's going on. And that's kind of what caused a lot of the things for me. When you're not being as present, it's really hard to focus on anything. I saw you at one point talk about something that has clicked with me and in my therapy as well. But as far as making sure you see a thought as a thought, you put your hand out in front, and it taught me, or made me like remember something that therapy taught me. And that is, we live so much life, especially those with anxiety or depression or other mental health issues, with our hand basically over our face, and we can't see what's going on. And it's not about, how did my therapist put it? It's not about getting rid of the hand. That's going to be there. Those things and thoughts are going to be there. But just taking a step back and going, okay, I recognize you're there, but I'm also going to do something over here, and not letting it kind of dictate and control everything. Really, that part where you said, we're all parts and all this stuff, that really speaks to me. As far as I know, a lot of times I used to think I do the things I do because I have anxiety, because I have depression, because I have borderline personality disorder. I used to think that was me, that's who I am. And no, what I've gotten to more at this point, and it's still always going to be a journey, but I may have those things, but they don't define who I am.
Mm-hmm.
I'm still my own being. I can still make it. And it was just kind of, like I said, that other light bulb moment of, as soon as you stop associating yourself with just one of those parts, it really feels like the picture gets clearer. I don't know if that makes sense to you, or I see a lot
100%.
of nodding. So
Yeah.
Excellent.
So in the Buddhist
Yeah,
tradition,
sorry, go ahead.
that's where I really appreciate some of the old language that uses things like demons and devils, because that's what it fucking feels like sometimes, right? It feels like our anxiety, or like literally my depression tries to kill me sometimes. That's fucking demonic, right? And so when the Buddha reached his awakening, a very popular story, this was the Buddhist devil. The Buddhist version of the devil is somebody called Mara, M-A-R-A, Mara. And so when the devil would try to attack the Buddha with like thoughts of hatred or thoughts of anxiety, thoughts of addiction, he didn't follow those thoughts, but he didn't deny those thoughts. He said, I see you, Mara. I got Mara tattooed on my hand so I could see Mara.
Very
And
cool.
so that's where we start seeing these these, you know, sometimes scary parts of our experience, like anxiety, and we go, oh, I see you. I see you. And I like how they have like characters like, yeah, it's a scary demon devil type, and I see you, devil. And then, you know, in modern traditions, we talk about welcoming Mara in for tea, like welcoming the devil in for tea. Like, yeah, sit down with me, devil. Let's hang out. Let's have a conversation. And that's where it's freeing. I don't think we ever get rid of our, you know, sometimes people think like awakening is like our limbic region just falls out of our fucking head or something. And it's like, no. We'll still have hatred. We'll still have craving. We still even may have depression and anxiety. But we're no longer gripping onto it. We're no longer obeying it. We're no longer fighting it. We see it. I see you. I see you. And that has been huge in my life, where like I said, certain ideations that, you know, my mind tries to fucking kill me, right? And it's like when I start seeing that thought, you know, it's like just witnessing it. I see you. It's extremely helpful. It's like, I'm going to go on a tangent, okay?
That's all good. Go right ahead.
Back to mindfulness. That mindfulness is this word. It's a Pali Sanskrit word. The original word is sati, S-A-T-I, S-A-T-I. And it was a British scholar. His name's Rhys Davids. He went over to Sri Lanka in the late 1800s to translate old school Buddhist texts. And he came across this word sati and translated it to the word we use today, mindfulness. And so this word mindfulness has been around a long time. But if we look at the original, like the more literal translation of the word sati, instead of mindfulness, it really means to remember. So like you're talking about driving mindlessly and you're like, oh, I remember I'm driving, right? Or when we are practicing mindfulness of breathing and we're lost in stories, judgments, plans of fantasies, we go, oh, remember to come back to the breath. Or when we're like future tripping, you know, we go, oh, I remember, that's just a thought, you know? Oh, and I love this analogy of just like, remember, it's just a thought. Remember, because I grew up, I'm the youngest in my family, and so I grew up kind of exposed to things that maybe I was a little premature to be exposed to, one of which is horror movies. I have a certain, you know, sentimentality around some horror movies, but I was exposed to those things a little young. And so when, you know, you see a scary movie and you're a kid and you get scared, your parent says, remember, it's just a movie. Remember, it's just a movie. And so when our minds take us to those horrific places, it's like, oh, remember, it's just a scary movie. Remember, it's just a scary thought. And that is huge for me. Yeah. So thanks for letting me go on that rant.
No, I appreciate it. And I also love horror movies, and it's tough because I don't get to watch a lot. My wife will not watch them. She's not about that.
Mm-hmm.
The other week, they had this movie theater deal. For $5, you got to see a mystery movie, and they wouldn't tell you what it is, but it was something that was coming out in the next week or two. And I'm like, okay. And they said horror edition, and I said, I'm in. So I went to the movies by myself, something I never would have done, 5 years ago even. But I went, and it turned out to be Companion, which is more of like it was like AI robots, dark humor versus like a horror movie, but still pretty good. But yeah, I have a soft spot for, the Conjuring series is always one of my favorite go-tos. I love rewatching some of the classics. Pet Sematary,
Hell yeah.
I like the original over the remake. Maybe that's just me being picky or nostalgic, but anything that can give me a jump scare, and it's so strange to me. Like, I still jump to these movies, but it's almost I don't know if it's a masochistic thought or what, but it's something enjoyable, and it's one of those times that I think it's almost like I can focus my anxiety on what's happening on the screen. Like now, if I feel that fear rising inside me, it's because I'm watching some paranormal activity happening, versus maybe I made my sandwich wrong and now I'm about to go into a panic attack or something.
Yeah.
But yeah, absolutely love horror movies. Do you have a favorite like series or movie itself that I know it's a loaded question with all the great works of art out there, but
I do though, and I think like a lot of it comes down to, like I said, sentimentality. Um, there's like a vivid memory I had of, like, I don't know, 12, 13 years old. I can't remember how old, but where my dad like showed me The Shining. And I remember he was like living in, we were in Florida, like in this like apartment that was like kind of on the beach, and we were like sitting down eating pizza watching The Shining, and like he was like showing me The Shining, and it was like this rites of passage I was going through. I was growing up to be a man because I'm watching The Shining with my dad, and had this like beautiful like sentimental moment with my dad watching a movie about a dad trying to kill his family, The Shining, right? But it was like, yeah, every time I watch that movie, it's like I have a, kind of a, soft spot to all of that. And yeah, I think even like horror movies in general, it is like this like coming of age thing for me. I watched the latest Evil Dead, and I was at the theater watching it with a buddy, and like when they got to that point where, spoiler alert, where they took the last demon character and threw it in the wood chipper. Like, I felt emotional because it was like, oh, it's like we aren't losing that absurdity as a culture because it was a scary movie, but then the extreme cartoonish violence at the end was like, oh, I belong in this world. Okay.
those are always fun moments to be like, all right, this is who I am, and then being okay with it. Because I think there's a
Yeah.
lot of times I'm like, should I be okay that I'm really digging what I'm watching right now? And uh, I get less concerned about me versus my 16-year-old because
Hmm.
I wouldn't say my 16-year-old likes horror movies. My 16-year-old likes gore movies. I'm talking
Yeah.
he really, really, really begged me to watch the Blood and Honey Winnie the Pooh movie.
Yeah.
T- was not a fan of the story at all. I wasn't, but he loves anything gore. So what I got to share with him is the Saw series. I
Hell
saw
yeah.
the the first Saw to me has one of the greatest endings to a movie. It caught me so off guard. Spoiler alert for anyone that hasn't seen the original Saw, however long that 20 years ago, I don't know,
Yeah, for real.
longer than that. Um, seeing John Kramer wake up in the middle of that bathroom, and you're just like, oh my
Hmm.
gosh. So I get to share that with him because I'm like, okay, he likes gore. If he's gonna want gore, I'm gonna give him at least decent gore instead of Winnie the Pooh, Blood and Honey. So
Yeah. So I have this like theory. It's not 100% true, but it seems to be true that if horror movie franchises stick around long enough, they end up turning into a comedy like franchise. Right? Not all of them, but Saw does not. They have that
yeah,
kind of murder mystery thing going on that keeps them from turning into a comedy. Yeah, Saw, like, all those are brilliant movies. Yeah, Saw.
I think it definitely was going to go down that path. Like, if you look kind of in the middle of the franchise, I think there was like a lull, and there was some points where people were like, "You're doing the same movie over and over."
Yeah,
But
for real.
I think they throw enough curveballs at you with the story, and like I just watched Saw X is the last one, the like Saw 10 that came out.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah.
and that probably had one of the weirder feels because like you start to feel bad for the main character, the serial killer of this whole series. You start to feel bad for him, and you're like, how could you treat this? And
Hmm.
that's a whole other thing on like because it's kind of I don't know if you've seen the 10th Saw, but
No, I haven't, but I know what you're talking
it
about,
has like
though.
it has some play on whether or not the healthcare system is going to allow for a certain thing to happen, and I'm like, of course we're cheering for Jigsaw over the healthcare system. That makes sense. Made me laugh.
Well, and like it's like I appreciate that. Oh, you know, some movies. What is that movie? There's some movies that have like the background story about. I know there was a Saw about that too, about the background of the villain, and I think that does very much tie in with mental health. That nobody's inherently evil, just singularly evil, but they have a chain of events that led them to do evil ass shit, you know? And that's what I'm saying. I spend time with people that, you know, to be blunt, have murdered people, right? And it wasn't like one day they just woke up and were like, yeah, I'm going to do some evil ass shit. No, it's just a chain of terrible events that led them to that point. And I appreciate when horror movies acknowledge that it's like, yeah, the killer has a past. And that, I think that gives us permission to look at our own past. And like I say, like what you're doing here is a great offering to the world because we're looking at our pasts and we're looking at our pains. And when we have compassion for our pain, it's like that non-reactive, like presence of loving our pain. We are less likely to go be the villain. We're less likely to go be Jigsaw or, you know, whoever, when we actually pause and be like, oh, what are you feeling right now? And, you know, to bring this back to Buddhism with horror, there is a serial killer in the time of the Buddha, you know, Angulimala. There's a famous story, Angulimala, who took the task of killing people out in the forest to collect their pinky fingers. And so it was his task to collect 1,000 pinky fingers, and he wore them as a necklace. So there was this guy out in the forest killing people and collecting their necklaces, or collecting their fingers as a necklace. So Angulimala means finger necklace. And yeah, and that story describes the past that he had, that he was like this overachieving child and then he became the serial killer, and then it has the redemption that he eventually became a Buddhist monk and eventually became the patron saint for pregnant people too. So yeah, I think there is a lot of heart wisdom in horror movies, and it doesn't have to be too. I like a good silly ass, you know, chopping people up, safe place to feel our fears and stuff like that. But what's yours? You asked me mine. I said Shining. What's your like go-to?
You know, it's hard to pick. I do love the classic. The Shining's great. Nicholson is such an amazing actor.
Hell yeah.
I do think one of the I mentioned Pet Sematary. That's one of my go-tos. I think just pure fear, and I love. When I look at horror movies, I also like different genres. So the zombie horror movie is kind of where I like to lean into a lot.
Okay, cool. Cool.
And so, although I do have a soft spot for a lot of of the original films versus remakes, the one exception in my book, I really like the Dawn of the Dead remake.
100%. I was just about to say that the remake is so much better than the original. Thank you for saying that. 100%.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
It's one of those.
Somebody's listening mad at us right now, but you're right.
I'm sure someone's like, "Really, you wanted that? What was it, Zack Snyder directed? I can't remember.
I don't remember.
Yeah. All I know is so Dawn of the Dead for sure is one of those. Pet Sematary. I love the Conjuring series. Anything with the Conjuring series to me is, I think, just the acting, and I really enjoy those movies where it's just like almost the presence versus you can see the threat. A lot of that paranormal stuff too. Blair Witch Project was one of the biggest impacts on me, because you have this whole movie that's gonna revolutionize the game and you never see anything. There's nothing happens, and yet you can feel that fear between their characters. So that's another one that kind of really drives me up, and I love Blair Witch Project.
I feel like Blair Witch, when it came out, we didn't know, right? We didn't know whether it was real or not, and then over time I feel like people were disrespecting it. I love that movie. There seems to be a newfound respect for Blair Witch, because you never see the witch, and what's scarier than the unseen, right? And not that we need to pull it back to mindfulness, but when you don't see those thoughts that are terrifying, it's scary. Not seeing the witch is terrifying, right? But when you see the witch, it's like, oh, I see you. You're over there, witch. So yeah, the Blair Witch, like, that was a wild time too. I was in high school when that came out. That's such a fucking good movie. Yeah.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of people that shit on it just because I think they wanted more of that monster movie and things to be happening. And it took a while to appreciate. Like, now I feel there is more of that cult classic feel to it. And you are spot on, because one of the biggest things that drives my anxiety is the unknown. When I can't logically tell you what's going to happen, that's when my anxiety starts to spiral. I go down all these different paths. If I got to go to this grocery store, what are, the 4 different ways this trip could go? And my mind, because it doesn't know, it's probably going to be a boring trip to the grocery store, but my mind wants to know how I'm going to be prepared for everything else. So
Yeah.
I guess, we've been talking a little bit about horror movies and gore and everything like that. And it brings me to Blood, Guts, and Buddhism. It's a book you're working on, and it's in production, if you want to, I guess. So it's called Blood, Guts, and Buddhism. Did I get that right?
Yeah, tentatively, Blood, Guts, and Buddhism, the Dharma of horror movies, heartbreak, and the nature of suffering. So that's the tentative title. It's in the publishing world right now. No timeline right now. But yeah, that's definitely something I've taken a lot of time on, is looking at horror movies, my own life, how they relate to horror movies, and how much horror is in Buddhism. I love all the horror in Buddhism. So I talked about Angulimala, the serial killer. I talked about the devil Mara. I have story after story about how there's so many great, especially, I specifically talk about Theravada Buddhism, early Buddhism. So I talk about their view of demons and devils. Throughout Buddhism, there's so many other stories. I could write like 5 more books about this. But yeah, Blood, Guts, and Buddhism. Yeah.
Whenever it does get through that publishing world, like I said, I'm very excited to be able to get a read on it. So you'll have to keep me updated there. I did want to kind of circle back here, and something that I was wondering to kind of get your expert opinion on. What do you think the media, and just like in general, because it's the only way I know about, what does the media get wrong about Buddhism? What is misportrayed, or is there something that's not fleshed out? I guess, what are your thoughts on how it's presented to the world, to people that maybe aren't practicing Buddhism?
Yeah, it's tough to. Yeah, we're always going to get it wrong, right? Like, there's a saying: "Wisdom written down on paper isn't true wisdom." So, me explaining Buddhism right now ain't really Buddhism, right? It's it's a tough thing. So, peace and love to the media if they're trying. I don't hear much about Buddhism, honestly, but we do get it wrong. In the nature of explaining it, it's still never going to be good enough. So the thing is, about speaking from my experience and my perspective, is that it awkwardly sits in line with all other spiritual faith, because there's no central belief system, and there's no understanding of God in it. It's non-theistic spirituality. So it's like, oh, we don't have a belief system and we don't have God. Well, what is it? And it's a practice. And that may be controversial to some people who practice this, because they say, well, yeah, Buddhism has a belief system. It's the Four Noble Truths. And I am of the tradition that we don't acknowledge the Four Noble Truths as beliefs. They're practices. And this is another way it lands. Like, the core teachings of the Buddha are the Four Noble, what we call, truths. And the first one is what we call dukkha, often translated as suffering. But, it's more than just suffering. It's pain in life. It's loss in life. He says birth is dukkha, Aging is dukkha, sickness is dukkha, death is dukkha, not getting what one wants is dukkha, being separated from all you hold dear is dukkha. And so it's this understanding, like kind of at the beginning of the conversation, we're going to have a hard time in life. Like everything in life is impermanent and changing, and therefore it's not fully satisfying. So we have this life that's just full of, death and pain and sadness and grief. But that's the first noble truth. Sometimes we say you're not going to find evangelical Buddhists because they're going to knock on the door and what they're going to say is, "Oh, have you heard the terrible news that life is full of suffering?" But that's where we start. And for me, that's like a refreshing thing because so much of my life, I grew up around like the DARE program and the Just Say No to Drugs campaign and all the stigmas around mental health and addiction and all that. But there was so much addiction and mental illness in my life. And I love that radicalness of like Buddhism's like, let's start with what we all don't want to talk about, but we all experience suffering. And so the second noble truth is the cause of real suffering, this cause of suffering, not necessarily a pain, but the suffering is our reactive and repetitive craving to avoid. So we have that like tension of I don't want to be in pain. I got to crave to get rid of this pain. Literally, this word for it is tanha, which translates to thirst. I have this thirst as an alcoholic that makes sense to me. It's like I thirst for pleasure as a way to avoid that first truth of pain. And so we're called to let go of that repetitive reactive craving to avoid pain. And when we embrace that first noble truth of pain, and we let go of our repetitive and reactive attempts to avoid it, we have this third noble truth. And this third noble truth is the realization of a higher happiness, which is peace. That we find a happiness within, that we find a security within. While the world is insecure by nature, well, where do I go with any of this? How can I find a place to be okay? Oh, go inside and find peace with our conflicts. And then when we find that security within, we find a happiness not born of this world. And when we find a happiness not born of this world, that means the world can't take it away from us. And we act with like this sturdiness. Like so much of my life, I thought security meant pleasure. And when I'm experiencing pleasure, I'm secure. And when I'm in pain, that's insecurity. And when I'm in pain, I'm insecure. So I got to figure this out. Somehow in life, I got to figure out how to always be in pleasure and never be in pain because I just don't feel okay. And this is where the Buddhist path says, you could be secure in the world as pleasure arises and pain arises. They both go away. So just ride the waves peacefully and find the well-being within. And that's the third noble truth, right? And the fourth noble truth is the Eightfold Path. It's like our program, right? Our program. This is how you do it. We have wisdom factors, we have ethical factors, we have meditation factors. And it's like one list leads to another list. Like I said, we're the list worshipers. So the first truth is embrace pain. Second truth is let go of the reactive, repetitive cravings to avoid pain. The third truth is notice how good it feels to find this internal sense of well-being when you embrace pain directly. And the fourth truth is there's a path to teach you how to live this way, to do this. So, I wish there was something so simple. Like I had to use a lot of words just to describe what Buddhism is, right? I wish there was like, we believe this. And it's like, no, you gotta dive in and do it. And typically the first thing that gets us to dive in is that honesty of like, aren't we having a hard time? Like, let's be honest. Like, you're having a hard time, right? I'm having a hard time. Like, we're all having a hard time. Let's be honest about it, okay? And that typically what brings us in. Most interviews, me and my friends, we laugh when we do non-Buddhist interviews, what got you into Buddhism? And it's always the answer, suffering. Hell of a lot of suffering got me into Buddhism, you know? So you didn't even ask that question. So, but that's typically what gets us into it, is that honesty. So, if Buddhism believes anything, it's like, well, not that all of life is suffering. That's a misconception. We don't believe all of life is suffering, but that it's a hard time from time to time here, isn't it?
That you spoke very, very clearly, and I appreciate you giving it a try. I know it's a tough one to like define. I'm not asking you to put a I can't speak today, a dictionary definition to it. So, but I appreciate your insight on it, and I also really appreciate and want to understand from your side the where balance comes into your life, because not only do you have everything here with Wild Hearts, you're going and visiting these people in treatment centers and prisons. Are you still in your band, the Rip Taylors, too?
Yeah, we're so okay. So I play in a we call it pop punk. Then people watch us and they're like, "You're not pop punk." We have a recent record review that said, "This is what I imagine modern pop punk would sound like if New Found Glory never existed to screw it all up." So, peace and love to New Found Glory, but we're like pre New Found Glory, pre Blink 182 pop punk, which people have now awkwardly called it Ramones core. So we're like a Ramones worship band. So it was I was with a therapist, and this therapist is a punk rocker like myself. I had moved to Nashville, and all I was doing is service work. Just helping people and getting a lot out of it, meditating. That's all I was doing. And this therapist, punk rocker, said, "You should start a band." And it was like, oh, like it's like joining a bowling league or, a softball team. It's like, oh, I should start a band, right? And it's like, I try not to take it seriously. For a second there I was, and that was fun, but I was reminded by our record label to chill out, and our record label chilled out too, because they're like the same thing. It's like, yeah, what do middle-aged punk rockers do for fun? Well, we start bands, we write zines, we make silly movies. Like, not everything has to be a fucking career. It's like, sometimes it's okay to do things for fun. And I think that's how, like, you and I don't know if you're a punk rocker or involved in the community, but what you're doing is extremely punk rock. Punk rock's based off of this DIY ethic. Do it yourself. Just go out there and do it. Don't wait for permission. Don't wait for sponsorship. Don't wait for somebody to, tell you you're good or this or that. Just go fucking do it, And when I saw you doing it, I'm like, this is punk rock. Yeah, I'm going to share his shit. I'm going to get a hold of him. Like, be like, yo, you're doing this. And I think that's what happens in the punk rock community. We don't compete with one another. We lift each other up, and we build our own networks, and this is what we do, right? Like, This is punk rock. Are you into punk rock? Are you part of the punk rock culture or anything like that? Or
So I am not, in a band or anything like that, but I absolutely love punk rock music. Growing up, I was really more into ska. Like, that was one of my musical awakenings, and understanding, because I had this balance where I did like the poppier stuff, so the Simple Plan and Bowling for Soup. I enjoyed that, but ska to me always felt like, here are some people that are probably in their garage just playing whatever they want, and it's upbeat, but they're singing real raw lyrics, and you don't know whether to dance or cry, and just that anytime it made me feel some emotion. So I love ska, I love punk rock, just any genre of music to me. If the lyrics or the beat speaks to me in a way, I'm all for it. Like I said, I did have some more of the name brand bands and everything like that
hell
that I
yeah.
was into for a while, as we all were. But yeah, I mean, I also really enjoyed just the ridiculousness of ska, if I can put it in that way, in the best of terms. I mean this in a positive way. Uh, I was joking around with somebody the other day that Wisconsin, where I live, we just take random sounds, throw them in a bucket, and shake it, and that's how we get our city names, because they're very diverse and everything like that. ska bands were like, let's take 7 words that don't even go together and just put it together. And I loved that. Like, yeah, I'm gonna own this album that says "Car Full of Midgets." Yeah, I'm gonna
Yeah.
listen to Mustard Plug. Like, I'm
Yeah,
all
mustard
for it.
plug.
You know, Real Big Fish, obviously, one of the bigger ones that people probably recognize and know. Like, I loved when they were in this movie called Basketball that was
Yeah.
based, off a made up sport. So I love that scene of music where you just get to be you. And I love an environment of live music and just being around other people and feeling that energy. And it brings me back to those days where maybe we weren't so focused on, it's weird because I talk a lot on technology. I use technology a lot, but I'm constantly reminded of those days where just going to a band and listening to some music, everything was, that vibe was good. So that's what I really love about that scene is just the welcoming vibe. Everyone's kind of silly in their best way. Don't take it seriously. That's where I'm at with that.
Feel that. Definitely. Yeah. Yeah. Like yeah. It's like I've never played ska or anything like that, but it's part of the scene. Just like like hardcore or even some hip hop. It's all like kind of on the same umbrella of that scene, emo stuff like that. So, I've seen so many. There's so many, like there's a resurgence, I think, of ska too, as well. Like a great band, a Catbite as a newer band I saw at Fest in Florida. They were so fucking good. They've been doing, I don't know if you like Operation Ivy at all, but they did like an Operation Ivy set with Laura Jane Grace recently that's going around there. And ska's like inherently anti-racist too, which is, it's like what a great, fun, but also like inspiring style of music. I feel you. I don't diss on ska. That's like the
Yeah, I
Blair
didn't
Witch
mean
Project of
to
genres.
diverse here. You were like, "Do you like punk rock?" And I'm like, "Let me tell you all about ska real quick. Hold on." So I didn't mean to go off on that wild turn there. Just
Let's do it.
so I appreciate. I know. What are some of the bands that really influence your childhood, your love of music, your want and desire to be a part of that scene? What are some of those bands you want to name drop, or people even currently that are influencing you?
So, okay, the band. Well, let me. Okay, so the culture itself in punk rock was huge in my life, and because I come from 1980s, 90s suburban America, where we were taught to keep appearances about us and not talk about suffering or pain or emotions, and then I go to a punk rock show and somebody's on stage screaming about their emotions, and I'm like, okay, that's what I need, And it's kind kind of interesting. Like my sister got me into punk rock. My brother, he's part of the punk rock scene too. So it's like the three of us like found such a home in the punk rock scene because of that attitude. Same reason I got into Buddhism, right? It's like punk rock saying, there's suffering in life, and Buddhism's like, yeah, let's make peace with that suffering. You're right, but the bands that I grew up with tend to be still what I listen to. So like the Ramones are my all-time favorite band. And that's okay, like a middle-aged guy saying, or middle-aged punk rocker saying the Ramones are his favorite band. That's extremely common. Why? Because they're so fucking good. I saw the Ramones when I was 14 years old in New Orleans, and the next day I started my first band, and I've been in bands ever since. So it's something about the Ramones that have that you can do this too, right? That DIY. So the Ramones are my all-time favorite. Still listen to them just about every day. The Ramones? You like the Ramones?
I do. I do.
You?
It's one of those bands that I know in general of. I don't think I've ever sat down and listened extremely like long to a lot of their stuff, but I know the Ramones. I like their sound. One that I'll have to put back in my rotation and just give it a bigger listen now, because I think it was for a while one of those bands that I heard, people are like, "Oh, if you like the Ramones, you're not cool, part of the cool crowd, like, and for a while when my life was so based on wanting to be accepted, I missed out on a lot of things. I always bring it back to like, at some point someone told everyone that Nickelback was terrible, and I'm sure I'll get some hate for this, but like, I dig I dig some Nickelback here and there, like it's part of my rotation. But so I definitely want to go back and give a listen to the Ramones, because I had more of that, I don't know what you would call it, Good Charlotte, Bowling for Soup, Simple Plan. That was my style of music listening growing up.
Hell yeah.
I saw Simple Plan in Sum 41 a few years ago. That was super fun. Sum 41 put on a great one, and now I'm glad I got to see them because they're not going to be touring anymore.
Yeah, they broke up. Yeah, I saw that.
So, I was like, at least I got that experience in. So
yeah, and it's like, fuck gatekeeping, fuck, guilty pleasures, like what you like. I never got into like Simple Plan. I've tried, especially recently, because another thing about me, if we haven't talked about all of my nerdy obsessions yet, I feel like this is like icing on the cake of my nerdy obsession, is I'm a Disney adult, and unapologetically a Disney adult, and Simple Plan are Disney adults. They play at Epcot constantly, and they put out like a song. What song was it? But there's a new like Disney pop punk record out with like Newfound Glory and Simple Plan, that like era of pop punk. And Simple Plan song. Have you heard it?
I have heard the like snippets and different songs from the album. I don't know if I've heard the Simple Plan one. I'm trying to remember who covered Eye to Eye from the
So
movie.
fucking good. So fucking
like,
good. Yeah.
This is insanely good. Like it's so good. I'd have to look it up because I don't want to.
I'm looking it up now.
But I heard it come on my Spotify, and I'm like, oh my gosh, like this is so good.
Yeah.
Love a
Goofy movie.
Song, so.
Goofy movie is so underrated too. I think everything we're saying is very generational to us. And Goofy movie is like that 90s movie. Eye to Eye is a great song. So I listen to the Ramones and Disney music.
Mm-hmm. I get it. When I talk to people, it's weird because I have my growing up of, Simple Plan, Good Charlotte, Bowling for Soup. My current obsession with Citizen Soldier is my favorite band right now. More of like a pop rock or like an alternative rock. They sing a lot about emotions. The lead singer is a therapist, and so he sings a lot about his stuff. But then I'll jump right over to musicals, and I can belt out Rent and Wicked and Avenue Q, which no one's talking about, but that's okay. It's one of those things that no one ever hears about. Avenue Q was this Broadway play put on. It was basically like if Sesame Street was R-rated or X-rated even.
Yeah.
And it beat out Wicked at like the 2004 Tony Awards and all this stuff. And but now you obviously not taking anything away from Wicked. It's a massive
so good
itself. But like
so good.
That's where my music, it just jumps everywhere. And if I can feel a lyric, bring it on. Like I'm all for that. My DJ on Spotify has no idea where to go next. If it's gonna jump to 90s hip hop or something else random, but I love music and podcasts, and just that listening to art is just one way that speaks to me. I like listening to my books on audiobooks. If I sit down and try to like read a paper book, it takes a lot of concentration. Hard with my ADHD, but with an audiobook, it for some reason it works. So
yep, me too. Yeah, I'm all about audiobooks. Yeah, there's been a few very niche books that I just recently read on audio. Great one recently. It's called From Punk to Monk. It's about a guy named Raghunath, Ray Cappo. He is the singer for Youth of Today and The Shelter, a couple other bands, and how he was a Hare Krishna consciousness monk and punk rocker. And a big part of my life is animal rights stuff, and that's been always kind of ingrained in punk rock. Like I've been vegan since, I can't remember how long, and how that had a great influence from the Hare Krishna movement, and how like the hardcore community took on a lot of animal rights stuff, and how it just trickled down to me as some suburban punk kid. So from punk to monk, highly suggest. So good. Yeah.
I will definitely have to add it to my list.
What are you reading or listening to?
I am listening to, I don't want to mess up the book title here, and it's going to be a psychology one. So it's called A Liberated Mind, and it's by Dr. Stephen Hayes, who kind of was one of the four founders of CBT and everything like that. And I really enjoy just his views on a lot of things, especially with, he has something like turning towards the dinosaur. So turning towards what's making you uncomfortable and what you're scared of, and kind of going back to what you've talked about, making sure like that's a thought, it's there, but I need to recognize it, and I can't, because if I just leave it in the unknown, if I keep my back to that dinosaur, I'll never grow, I'll never get past, and the dinosaur might be this big, and just this tiny little thing. So that's my current audiobook. I am all over the place. I love psychology books, understanding that my therapist says that I'm probably, it's probably detrimental how much I want to dig in and logic. He's like, sometimes you just got to be, and I'm like, but I want to know how it all works. And that's not how it goes. Like, but yeah, so that's my current read. I have a lot that I want to that are on my list, between that and my plethora of podcasts I listen to, because the community on Instagram has been so nice and supportive, and I've met people from different countries and different parts of the United States, and I talk to people that are true crime podcasts, because that's one of my favorite podcasts. I love true crime podcasts. I've talked to people that do self-help podcasts, people that do movie review podcasts, and it's all over the place. And so I have somebody in Australia I listen to a conspiracy theory podcast all the time, because those are super fun too. So I'm all over the place. I don't put myself in a box as far as what I like or what I enjoy. It's if I do, awesome. If it doesn't vibe with me, it's not my thing. But I'm not going to trash it. Just pass along and go from there.
Yeah. Cool.
As we start to get near the end here, I wanted to know, was there anything you wanted to cover, make sure that we said on this conversation specifically? Any questions for me, or anything you want to just shout out or say, this is kind of your moment for that?
Yeah, and if we're getting towards the end, typically in my tradition, we close with a dedication of merit, and that's kind of what I started with too. Like, what a dedication of merit is the acknowledgement that what we do in here in our hearts has a ripple effect out into the world, and that's where it's like, endlessly grateful. Thanks for having me. Thanks for doing the work you're doing. Like, we are part of a revolution, right? A movement. And let's keep this wheel turning, right? So this is only going to make the world a better place by talking about, how our minds, really, kind of the main conversation today, our minds. And so thank you so much for doing this. And if anybody would like to continue to follow me, check me out, Mikey Livid, on Instagram, at Mikey Livid on TikTok. I got a lot of things coming out in the future. So, follow me specifically on Instagram. Speaking of podcasts, in the next month or so, I'm going to launch a new podcast called Punks on Hope. Punks on Hope's about mental health and punk rock. Probably very similar to the conversation we had today. And most of my work could be found, my current work could be found at Wild Heart Meditation Center. So we have a podcast. Wherever you get podcasts, just look up Wild Heart Meditation Center. I teach every Friday night. If you're in Nashville, come out. Friday night, 7 p.m. We're in East Nashville. Wild Heart Meditation Center. If you are not in Nashville, still want to join the community, we have an online class every Monday at 7 p.m. Look us up, Wild Heart Meditation Center on Instagrams, where we post the link every week. You can get that link or any of our other offerings at wildheartmeditationcenter.org. We have an extremely rare and beautiful thing happening at Wild Heart. It's pretty amazing that when I started meditating, there weren't a lot of me's. Most of the people I meditated with were monastics and much older than me. And now I go to Wild Heart, it's like young people meditating, and it's like, damn, you're like 22 and you're meditating. What are you doing? And it's just like awesome. And the room's packed. And it's like, whoa, that's why I see this movement happening, that people want freedom from the burdens of the grip of their own suffering. And so, yeah, if I could serve you in any way, look me up online, look up Wild Heart Meditation Center online. Let's hang, let's meditate, let's cry together, let's laugh together, let's enjoy this life together. Thank you. Mikey on mute. The Mikeys.
Mikey's here, yes. we didn't get a chance to talk about the similarity here, because I don't talk to a lot of other Mikeys. I get a lot of, oh, do you mean Mike or Michael? And I'm like, no, if I told you I'm Mikey, that's what I'm going by here. So it's really cool to see the refreshing, and I know that you probably have experienced just as much. Well, maybe certain people in the past have like, I can't call you that, it's a child's name or something like that. And I'm like, well, I guess, I mean, I do act like a child quite a bit, so it might be fitting, but I rock with it. It helps me stand out from, my dad is also Mike.
Yep.
And
mine too.
Michael oh really?
Yeah.
And Michael feels like I just got in trouble, whether it's with my wife or with my parents, something like I'm in deep shit or something like that if someone's calling me Michael. But whether it was from, my teenage years to now, Mikey has just kind of been my way to stick out and go. So I don't know if it's been a similar experience for you, or kind of how you embrace that name of Mikey and Mikey Livid all together here.
Yeah, so it was in high school. I started a band called the Livids, and we were another Ramones ripoff band. And if you know the Ramones, there's Joey Ramone and Johnny Ramone and Marky Ramone and Tommy Ramone. and so, yeah, that's where I turned into Mikey real quick. And then it just stuck. And I've tried to Mikey Livid is not my government name. And there's been times, I think 2 major points in my life where I tried to go back to my government name. And sometimes I still go by my government name. If you look me up at Wild Heart, you'll find what my real name is, or government name is. But no, this is what people call me. So it's like fuck, Mikey Livid too. It's like, and you are officially now Mikey on mute. That's your last, on mute is your last name. So
it's just gonna have to be. That's what people call me, and
yep.
I'm riding with it, and I loved it because I get a lot of with the podcast, so how does Mikey on mute, what's that? What is that name to you? And the whole point of coming off mute and talking about things that I didn't want to before. So if that's my identity now, rock on. Fuck yes. That's awesome. I'm fully embracing Mikey on mute, as you should fully embrace who you are as Mikey Livid. I cannot say enough. I look at the time here, Mikey, and I think we can sit here and talk for hours and hours. And this is our first ever conversation in person. I can't thank you enough for coming onto the podcast. You've been such a big supporter on Instagram and just in our messages back and forth. I really can feel the compassion you have and the care you have. And so I really want to thank you for taking this time, spending this time with me, sharing this. And I really, really feel like there's a friendship here to be had. And so I'm very appreciative of you.
Yeah, same. Very much. Very much. Thank you so much. Whew. that hit.
I know.
So
It got heavy there for a second. We got pretty serious there for a second. So, but
yeah,
I do
thank
like
you
to
so
speak
much.
it as it comes to me. I really appreciate it. I am very thankful and lucky. Like, I understand a lot of people try to start podcasts and they don't really go anywhere. And so I joked a little bit earlier offline about how many people jumped at the opportunity to come on and interview with me, and maybe I should have stepped back, but it's really a blessing, and I'm so thankful for everybody. And every time I have a conversation with someone new, I learn new perspective. I get a new outlook on something. I gain some kind of knowledge. I love the idea that we never can go back to square one. I've talked about that a few times. And so now I have knowledge and experiences and perspective that you shared with me that will be with me carrying forward. I will never go back to my pre Mikey Livid days, which is great. Which is great. So again, like, just I might sound like a broken record, but I really appreciate you being on the podcast today.
Yeah, same. I appreciate you having me. I appreciate our newfound friendship. So look forward to see where this goes. Yeah, thank you so much.
Absolutely. And before I try to start a band of Mikey and Mikey or something like that, we'll come up with a name later on.
Yeah.
Ladies and gentlemen, this is Mikey going back on mute. Until next time, take care, everybody. This episode of Mikey on Mute is brought to you by Little Jerk Society. Little Jerk Society is a clothing company fueled by the raw energy of creative rebellion, celebrating those who march to the beat of their own drum. They care deeply about mental health and believe in a world where everyone can thrive, regardless of their challenges. Use promo code Mikey on Mute to save 15% on your order at littlejerkclothing.com. Again, that's littlejerkclothing.com. And remember, use promo code Mikey on Mute, all one word, to save yourself 15%. Go off and make a change.